That's beautiful. Thanks. Yeah, I know. The question continues on about what's going to be available. Do you have any more thoughts on what can be done for those dedicated to being part of this? So that's really awesome that you've mentioned that again, and I hope that we'll be able to sort of all of us pulling our energy and our intention together to find the more of us that do this, the energy will change on the planet, the circumstances, the dynamics, everything will change. And the more of us that do it, the better. And if we can all, I know you've already got a fantastic team in there that are working together to help. I've already had plenty of help from you as well as a few others in the group there. And I can see that there would be many of us that would be willing to be volunteering our time and energy once we have comprehension, and each one of us helps at least 5 others, and those 5 help at least 5 others. I'm just using a low number here. The numbers can just get bigger and bigger and bigger as to how many have actually be able to go through at least the status correction course. That the more of us that do it, the better is what I'm feeling. The other question attached to this is about Mia actually is residing on a land known as Portugal, so there's no US dollars, and we've already asked you the question about other countries at the moment. With all the work it's taken this long to work about how to do this status correction on the US. What are your thoughts on that as regards how long will it take? This is why you have to, like you've just said, you're working night and day on this. You can't expect people can't expect you to be doing this for nothing. If you have to go and earn a living by having a job, when are you going to have time to do all of this? So we have to appreciate that, for me, it's not questioning. So many people are in this program, well, if it's truth, it has to be free. Unfortunately, like you say, it doesn't work like that in this world at the moment. This is what we're striving to change. So, So, as regards the other countries, I like I said, I know it's a lot of work. What are you sort of seeing in that aspect?
Well, the one question in that is if somebody wants to become a member, they don't have ease to access working with Bitcoin and don't have U.S. money orders, you can donate via I think every post office in the world has a facility for creating international money orders. And so those can be created in Europe or wherever and sent over here. So we can receive those donations that way. If somebody wants to come on board, has any issue at all with any logistical or practical issue or financial issue, just communicate with us. We have people doing that every day. And, basically, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just vital there, what's the best email or whatever for people to use to send those questions to get answers?
It would be admin, ADMIN, at panterapca.org.
Awesome. That's
okay.
Great.
And right now we have members somewhere between 25 and 35 countries. I did a list about a year ago, and we were somewhere in the close to mid-20s, and more countries have come in. Right now there's another question about English. Yes, right now it has to be in English because that's the language we all know that we're building it. One day we will have the resources and the sophistication to have cross-language translations and things like that. As it relates to the status correction process, it is first and has been, of course, focused in the U.S., and so that's either naturally born or naturalized American national who has been operating as a U.S. citizen and now converts back to basically a private American national and a state national. But we're 90% done with everything for the U.S. It will be completely done in the next several months. It has to for many reasons, not the least of which is this is where I am, and this is most of us are. It had to be the U.S., but on a legal technical reason, everything, and I think I mentioned this last show, everything does correspond to and channel through the corporate structure of Washington, D.C. All the countries are basically traded as corporations. And as I have said before, there's really only one corporation on the planet. That's the Crown Corporation. Everything is a corporate subdivision. So, but in practical terms, the Uniform Commercial Code and through the monetary system of the Federal Reserve System is hardwired through the U.S. system, basically through D.C. and New York. And so we have to perfect, and we're nearly there, everything as it relates to the U.S. We are building a consensus group of people in the 5 major British Commonwealth English-speaking world, which would be Canada, UK, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. We have people, probably a total of about 25 or so, who want to work together. They're already members of Pantera and work together to restate what needs to be restated for those individual countries. We're starting that now. We have been kind of inching towards that over the last year and a half. But now that we're just about done with the U.S. system, we can now focus on those 5 countries. We're bringing that team together. Each small grouping will focus on each of the individual countries, and we will, over probably about the next 6 to 9 months, I figured it will take, we will perfect the status correction process for each of those countries. Once we do that, then we can move on to essentially the rest of the world. But it takes precision on each country's unique aspects in terms of its legal, lawful, and historical structure to do certain key things that have to be researched and figured out. Right.
So this has just popped up question, just to kind of go with that, is say, for example, somebody who, this is actually in Mia's case, let's say you guys managed to sort out how to do those English-speaking countries that we talked about, UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, whatever. Say you were born on the UK, but you're living in a European country. What would your status be then, like, if you travel to another country? Say, for example, even if a U.S. national was now, U.S. citizen was corrected into being an American national, get all these wordings right. Let's say that living being has travelled into one of the countries where nobody's done this. What would their status be there?
Well, everybody's status on the whole planet, except for the few, is that of a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. Wherever you were born, that particular national corporation was sometime in the last 100 years put into bankruptcy. The reorganization of bankruptcy, if I file bankruptcy individually, forget about whether it's I'm a bean or a franchise, but say a normal guy goes down to the U.S. bankruptcy court and files bankruptcy, what he is doing is putting a closure to the estate at that particular time, and then that estate is looked at as to its assets and its liabilities, and then it can liquidate or it can reorganize. And then a new franchise or a new version of the franchise is birthed at that point, and you go off and you operate as such. So that was done with every country. And, of course, the paramount one was the United States because of its centralization with what we just talked about, the corporate structure, the military, the UCC, and all of that. Because post-1933, between the 30s and 1966, the Uniform Commercial Code was perfected in all 50 states and federally. And at that time, 1966, there was an act called the Federal Tax Lien Registration Act, in which a line or a phrase was put in there that said, henceforward, all matters pertaining to monetary policy and taxation shall be under the purview of the Uniform Commercial Code. it means it turned everything into commerce. And then, of course, there's the International Commercial Code, and that's how banks and money moves and settlement and all of that creates this global network of bonded commercial structure. So wherever one is born, a franchise is created. That franchise is known as a resident. The word resident comes from two words, res and identity. So the identification of the res means property or the object of the thing is a literal translation. That's how property held in trust is referred to as the res. So when one is a resident, you are hardwiring your identity to the object of the thing, meaning the chattel property that's held in the franchise, which is collateralized against the perpetual debt system. So when you move, if you were born in the UK, you moved over here, you brought your franchise and you resituated the resident. All of which is corporate fiction, like what we talked about in the beginning. And so all you did is re-register the location within the global singular corporation managing all of its franchises and its residents. Status correction is about severing that connection and attachment so that you are not a resident. You don't reside anywhere and all those kind of things. So if a UK individual moves into Europe, they've moved the franchise, but they're still the same basic status, the bonded surety to the bankrupt franchise. What we do here, and we're starting, of course, as I just explained with the U.S., if somebody has come into the United States, moved their resident, their franchise, became a naturalized citizen, you birthed a U.S. person by doing that. That's your situation. Jolly, that's what you did. Yep. You became naturalized, or your resident became naturalized. The franchise now was reconstituted as a U.S. person. The naturalization certificate is the same as the birth certificate. It's the birth certificate of the U.S. person. That birth certificate represents the several things. It represents the equitable interest in the underlying estate, which is on the private side of the ledger, which we have no access to because we don't have the standing or the status. It represents, it's a bond against the original account. That original account was created, in your case, in the United Kingdom. And you just move that over here. And so a bond, a certificate as a bond, is evidence of a private trust, and it represents debt. So whether it's a naturalized certificate or a birth certificate, it's just a bond, which is evidence of a private trust, which is evidence of a bonding against the underlying estate. The estate builds and accrues the actual credit or value. When the public instruments are created, such as birth certificates and everything off of that name, that's debt, which is against the value. We don't have access to the value because we don't have standing. When we correct our status and we do all the steps to claim that estate, claim the equity, and the various other things that we do, now we have the standing to claim it. And then we go on from there, which is another story for another time.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was, the other part of that question was, say, for example, I did the status correction here in the U.S. Then if I were to travel to Europe, what would my status be there?
Travel or move to live?
Well, travel first, then move to live. Travel first, and then let's do move to live. Just in case.
Well, there's a concept that's been around for a long time called the perpetual traveler. So let's start from what do we achieve, or what is our standing when we actually have gone through all the steps with status correction.
Right.
We are no longer a resident attached as surety to the bankrupt franchise. The bankrupt franchise is controlled within the public system under civil, corporate, commercial, military, civil procedure. The word civil is related to the Latin word civitas, which means the containment field, which we can now translate and call the public. So whether it's the civil body, the public, or other versions of that, it's a civil body. The civil body is lifted off the land. When you're not on the land, you have no standing, you have no substance in law. This can go back to the earlier question, how does what we do compare to other people who are pursuing different angles? Well, one of those angles is, saying that we're bringing forward common law. But in actual technical fact, you don't have law if you have no standing, and you can only have standing if you're on the land. If you're lifted off the land and attached to the civil body, then you are controlled in civil procedure and everything that operates in the public system. Once you change that, now you return to having standing on the land, and you are standing within and on your private estate. Not a public estate, but a private estate. When you leave that private estate, and that could be a little piece of land, 20 feet square, it could be 1,000 acres, it doesn't matter the size, it's just your private estate. When you leave that estate, whether you leave it to go to the grocery store, you leave it to go to Europe, you are sojourning or traveling away from your private estate. And you carry with you the standing and the status that you had there. A variation of looking and understanding that is if you do study the common law and how it actually really worked in ages past, because it doesn't work anymore for almost the entirety of things, it was based on the man who had standing was on the land, was considered, and in the United States was a qualified elector. Or in Europe, you could be a qualified elector if you were part of the landed aristocracy. And only a sovereign can hold a court of record. And this goes back to the actual kings and queens who were the sovereigns and held their court. If you look in a law dictionary, the definition of the word court is the place where the sovereign sojourns to, carrying with him his royal retinue in order to establish his court and bring forward what he wants to in his court. So wherever you sojourn on the land, in the world, you're moving away from your private estate in sojourning, but you carry with you your status and standing. As it would relate to practical terms, if you move, say, from the United States and you had established your standing and you wanted to move to Europe or Latin America and you go into a country, the way we have constructed things is, I don't want to be limited in this world. I want complete freedom of movement to be able to be effective in the world and actually exert influence and work in the world that's going to change the world. So I don't want to be limited to having to stay hunkered down somewhere and not be effective. So everything, and that was my goal 25 years ago, figuring this out so that we could actually achieve that, which now I know we have. So, and I can't go into all the detail because it's very complex. It's understandable once you've studied it, but, I'm going to summarize this, but keep in mind that there's a lot of missing parts we're not talking about. But the bottom line is turning the whole system around, taking control of the name. And see, this is where our conversation started when we first met and talked before the first show. Was all about what your work has been so far, leaving the name behind. Well, to me, that creates limitation. That's kind of the discussion I had with Cyril last call was about, whether you want to discard the name and refute any attachment to it, or if you want to rearrange it so you control it, because that still is a useful tool. It's still a tool that we can use to be in the world but not of it, in the terms of into the bonded corporate matrix world. We don't want to be of it, but we want to utilize it. You had a comment that you sent to me from Arthur and Fiona down in Australia, who had something on his Facebook that was saying that that my approach is wrong because you can never be free in the system. His approach is you have to leave it completely behind. But then again, as I was just saying, that means you will never be able to really move around. And quite frankly, nobody can be without the system, because I would put it back to Arthur in that comment that how did you communicate that? You use Facebook, you use the global World Wide Web, the Internet, you use computer components made in China or Korea, et cetera, et cetera. So how can you say you're not utilizing and working within the system when you do that? Okay. So, where is the shirt that you're wearing? Who actually exerted their labor and, whatever they had to sacrifice to work in? Sorry, my headphone fell out of my phone.
Okay.
We're all connected to the system, so why not turn it around and compel the system and its constructed law form, where remedy actually exists, compel the actors and the officers to do their duty according to the way the law is actually written.